Is anybody else really cold? I'm like, I should have not have worn sandals because my feet are like blocks of ice. I just keep escaping outside to like thaw a little bit.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I know it is 11 o'clock on Saturday, and you guys are like the Gideonites that made it to the very end. So I'm thrilled you're here today. My name is Chris Reuter. This is my wife, Jen. And we're going to be co-leading with Kiana Johnson, who's going to be joining virtually. But we're thrilled to be with you today. My goal, I don't know about you, for me, once I get about 2 or 3 lessons into the convention, normally I start to like feel a little overwhelmed. So my goal is the opposite today. I want to just really encourage everybody, and hopefully, I don't want you to take a ton of things away. If you just take one nugget away, that would be good for me. So I do have an upfront disclaimer too. Parenting foster kids is very, very complex. Each child's unique. I always get real nervous when I do, because I know there's people in the crowd that really should be doing the class and I should be taking the notes. We are not experts. We have adopted twice. We have done foster care. Kiana, that's doing it with us, we've done foster care for 5 years, in addition to adopting for 15 years. And then we also have Kiana that's been doing foster care for 8 years. So we've got some experience, but I know there's people in the crowd that's got more. And our goal is just to give you some guiding principles. If you see something that doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. But we don't want you to act like we're the foremost experts. So anyway, with that being said, I wanted to introduce my family. So if we could show, there they are. I'm not going to ask you which one is my foster child, but that's our family of 6. And besides my lovely wife, Jen, we have a 21-year-old Megan, a 19-year-old Destiny, a 16-year-old Nini, and a 13-year-old Ethan. And Ethan is the life of the family. So that's a little bit of our family. My wife's a speech pathologist, and we've dealt really with every type of trauma out there. We've dealt with mental health issues in our family. We've dealt with defiance disorder. We've dealt with attachment disorders. I mean, so we feel like we've got a lot of just trial by fire. We didn't honestly always know at the time what we were doing, but that's a snapshot of our family. I also want to introduce Kiana. Kiana Johnson was in my campus ministry 20 years ago. She's a dear, dear friend, and she is one of the most impressive women I've ever been around. She's got a PhD. She's got from Purdue multiple masters, and she did foster care actually as a single woman. And then she adopted her child, one of the children that she was fostering. And then she also did foster care after and had a biological child. That's her husband, Tongai. Unfortunately, Kiana has very serious pre-existing health conditions. She cannot be here today, but because we wanted you to have her wealth of wisdom, we made her record herself. And so she is going to join us today. But Kiana, you'll pick up pretty quick. She's an amazing woman. So that being said, I want to share some stats on the foster care system. So if you know these, just, I'll try to go through them really quick. But there's about over 615,000, this is from 2020, kids that are annually victims of abuse and neglect in the United States. Any given day, there's about 400,000 kids that are in the foster care system in the U.S. And 72% of those kids of neglect are actually under the age of 10. 48% of the kids get reunified with the parents. 25% are adopted. And of those that age out, we just had one of our children with us, Destiny, age out of the system. The stats aren't great for those kids, unfortunately. 29% report being homeless between 19 and 21. 43% are unemployed. And 30%, by the age they're 21, still don't have their GED or high school equivalent. So I'm not trying to discourage you, What I am going to share next is a verse that I'm going to share. This verse we've heard, if you've been around the church for any time of length of time, you've heard this thousands of times. But I'm going to bring it up because I think we never really think of it in context of ourselves. Raise your hand. If I ask Christians, do you feel like you're the light of the world? Nobody goes, man, most people, maybe there's one happy soul. Most people don't go, that's me, right? What we typically do in the church is we go, well, that sister over there, or that brother over there. I'm telling you, if you want to be involved, the vast, vast majority of people I've seen in the foster care system are the most amazing souls ever. And it's not always for the faint of heart, but it's such an amazing thing because we're dealing with a lot of neglect, trauma, a lot of times, really dark situations, at least in our experience. And those dark situations are challenging. And so it's easy when you're in a lighted environment to add a little light. But to embrace that with you today, it's really a high calling. And I just want to thank you for attending. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to my wife, Jen.
Okay. So as Chris was, talking about the different, behavior disorders or whatever that we've had experience with, I have a funny story. Our kids were reading our bio, and it lists them off, and they were like, "Oh, that's really cool, Mom." And one of my kids was like, "Wait a second, which one is me?" I was like, "Well, honey." I thought that was funny. So, here is, this, I don't know if anybody's seen this before, or a graphic like this before, but it's kind of just the hierarchy of needs. And as you can see, relationships are just in the middle there. So it's easy to see why relationships are hard for kids in the foster care system, because they're just not really on the radar until those basic physiological and safety needs have been met. So what we've seen time and time again is that these kids are in survival mode. Their focus is on getting what they want, what they need, or what they perceive they need by any means possible. And from their point of view, unless you're getting them something that they need or want, the relationship is pretty useless. So, and also a lot of adults have hurt them, obviously. So, we have an opportunity while they're in our home to show them that relationships are valuable, and that relationships can be also a positive experience. So that's kind of our job. So no pressure or anything. I mean, that's a lot. That's why we need God. Let's play a video from Kiana here. Hopefully this plays.
Foundational to parenting children in foster care is building connection. It's really important to consider attachment, which is the relationship between a parent and a child that makes the child feel safe, secure, and protected. One of the best gifts that you can give a child who has been in foster care is a safe base. It's important to remember that working toward this stability can be very difficult. I've seen countless times where youth and children, they work really hard to sabotage interactions because they can predict what they think is going to happen. It can be frustrating when the same issues continue to keep coming up and they test your stability and love. It's during these times when it's important to stay calm and to not take these attacks personal. It's also important to try to focus on the relationship that you'd like to have with them. So how do you help kids feel safe? Consistency. Inconsistent parenting can be confusing, and it doesn't foster a sense of security. Kids need to know what to expect, and this is true for all kids, not just those in foster care or those who have a history of abuse and trauma. When kids know what to expect, it's much easier for them to follow the directions and to have positive experiences. To build these connections, we need positive, connective experiences as often as possible. And I've often heard and experienced for myself, the days that you like your kids the least is when you need to connect and love them the most. That's hard. It's really hard, but it's doable. And you also want to include as many opportunities to play and have fun as much as possible. Remember, you're trying to help rewire the brain. And for me, I found like mentorship, so seeking out relationships with other foster parents and attending different conferences to be connected with those who are doing the same thing provides a very different perspective and a lot of insight. And then lastly, in terms of building connection, it's really important to keep in mind that children are coming to you from a whole nother from another family, from other families somewhere, and they have this history. They might have good relationships, bad relationships, but it might be good to find ways to help them to connect with their siblings or whatever other family that they've left from where they've come. It's especially important if reunification is the goal.
Okay. Can you guys hear that okay? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
if we need to bump it up a little, let us know.
I'm so sad that you guys can't see Kiana in person because she is so amazing. So she's 5 feet tall, 100 pounds dripping wet. But she is so amazing, what she's done as a single person, and very inspirational. She actually, when she was, her little boy there is 3, but when she was pregnant with him, she was 9 months pregnant, going to give birth any day. She was fostering a teen who had just given birth. So the teen and the newborn are in her home, and Kiana is getting up in the middle of the night, 9 months pregnant, taking care of the newborn. I was like, you are crazy. And, you have to have a little bit of crazy, to be doing this, honestly, but she's amazing. So building connections. So one thing that we can do is really use those routines to build connections with our kids. Our very first foster placement, so we were, excited. We're brand new foster care license, totally green, and our first placement was a 2-year-old little girl, and she only said 2 words: shut and up. And she loved to tell us how. For the longest time, we're like, "What is she?
What is she saying?
Shut up! Shut up!" We're like, "What is she saying?" Like, "Oh, she's telling us to shut up." So cute. But we also quickly realized that she had probably never slept in a bed. So what she probably did was run around the house until she got sleepy, and then just curl up on the floor or curl up on the couch. So, and there's no judgment in that as a bedtime routine. Believe me, God has humbled us so much. We have no judgment on anyone's parenting techniques. But think about, what I want you to think about is the relationship opportunities that are missed in that scenario. So no one is bathing her, no one is putting on her PJs, so she's missing all of that nurturing touch. No one's tucking her into bed or talking to her about her day. So we can think about, as foster parents, just how can we put some of those relationship opportunities back into their routines. So, and especially routines like meal times and bedtime. So cooking with them or letting them see you prepare their food, brushing their hair, feeding them, things like that. And it's pretty easy to imagine that with little kids. You might be thinking, okay, but I have big kids, it's never going to work with them. But you would be surprised. We have one of our teens would let us push her on a swing and read to her. We read, what was it, Chronicles of Narnia or something, read to her. Of course, when nobody is looking, she would never be caught dead with anybody knowing that. But the point is that because these older kids missed out on a lot of that, they secretly really like to relive that. So working those connection points back into their routines. Another idea is just to pair the relationship time with something that is desirable to them. This is going to sound a lot like bribery, and maybe it sort of is, but just follow me here. And we have never been above bribery in our parenting anyway.
It's a tactic.
Yeah. So pairing it with something that's really important to them. So maybe with younger kids, maybe there's a really cool toy that they love to play with. Put it up in the closet and reserve it just for time, with you, that they only get to play with it when they're with you. For older kids, maybe the coffee shop or the arcade that they really want to go to, they only get to go with you. we had a beloved attachment therapist who would always say, you be the source of food, you be the source of fun. If they want those things, they have to go through you. They have to go through the relationship. And this way they can begin to associate relationships with something positive. That's you.
All right.
Oh, shoot.
So I'm going to give you our points up front, just because I'm simple. So I should have done this a few minutes ago, but we're only going to, we call it the 3 B's. So when Kiana and Jen and I met together, we thought, okay, with doing foster care, if we can just do 3 things, the first one we're talking about is building connection. The second one's going to be behavioral support. The third one is going to be boundaries. Those 3 things for us were critical both in adoption and foster care for us to be successful. And it's different for each age. You know, most people think, I don't know if you know, the number one reason that children enter the foster care system, a lot of times we think of sexual abuse, drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol are actually only about 39% of the cases that come in through drugs and alcohol. The number one reason kids enter the foster care system is because of neglect. And so they've not been played with, they've just been put in front of a TV for hours, they just have no human interaction, they've not been fed properly. It's mostly a neglect issue is why kids enter the foster care system. So one of the things that I would do with the older kids, and Jen and I had different strengths. I was kind of the preteen teenager, you know, that's kind of my niche, and you'll hear this a little bit more. Jen was really much better with the younger kids. But for me, it was monthly, at least monthly, having a fun date. You know, doing something, you know, foster care, if you have behavioral issues, sometimes it can revolve around those issues, and you don't have enough fun in the relationship. And so what I would always say is, how does that foster kid define fun? What does fun look like to them? It's different than what it looks like for me, but do I have fun? And you know, for Destiny, it was ice cream, Starbucks, movies, you know, those types of things. Sometimes it's bike rides, walks, museums for the older kids, but you've got to have fun. You know, we know this with our biological children, right? We got to go on dates, right? But foster care, they need it even more because of the vast majority of them have been thoroughly neglected, right, throughout their childhood. The other thing that's hard but is important is that we have a vision for our children, like that we actually believe and that we have goals for our kids to blossom, right? That we're not just doing it to, we really want them to blossom. And so a lot of times, especially for the older kids, I would ask, you know, what are your dreams? What are your ambitions? Destiny, who was with us, she had straight D's and F's when she came into my home. My first goal was, well, she's wickedly smart. How do I help her? And she graduated high school, so she's one of the 70% that made it with an AB average from Westfield High School in Indiana. But one of the things is I'm going to believe in her. I'm going to have vision. Even when she comes to our house for dinner last week, and I was like, what are you going to do? And I'm trying to give her a pep talk because they have such an ingrained feeling of unworthiness, right? That they're not worthy of anything. And so I have to counter that and be a counteracting force to believe. But vision is important. Kids thrive off of that. She still comes in, even after she's aged out, we want to be home base, right? So she comes over for dinners. We got her set up for her first apartment, those types of things. So that's building connection. Since I already shared the second one, why don't we just go to behavioral supports? Now this one I think is the toughest, at least for us. How do you deal with behaviors? You know, the whole old school teaching in the church, you grab the spoon. That does not work well in the foster care system. It is not approved, at least in my state of Indiana. You cannot do that. And
no state.
Yeah. And so how do you guide some child's heart when you don't have mechanisms always available to you? Like what is effective? So we're going to share what was effective for us. You guys can again, only take what's helpful here. One of the things I'll say is, you know, foster care, I always think it's being led by the Holy Spirit. Grace and guidance of the Holy Spirit is critical. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I found that I had one little guy that had defiance,
Oppositional defiance.
Oppositional, I always get it wrong. Oppositional defiance disorder. I mean, he would throw his food down on the ground, mean, what worked with him was totally different. Each kid was just totally, totally different. And so, I wanted to share this scripture. I think this scripture, this is the only other scripture I've got in the whole lesson. My grace is sufficient for you. I think foster and adopted parents need this as much. We need a ton of grace. Have you ever pinched yourself and you're like, I don't know what to do? I've done that as a parent, right? Just take foster and adoption out of it. But sometimes you get into cases, you're like, I honestly don't know what I do. I need advice, I need help. But the good thing is Jesus says your grace is sufficient, and weakness in parenting is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It just means that we need the Holy Spirit and we need advice and help from other people. So I use this scripture because sometimes I feel very weak, but that's actually not a bad thing, right?
So we, for talking about behavior, we split it up into younger kids, so toddler to school age, and then preteen to young adult. But I don't know that we really needed to do that. I think these are kind of general principles that work for all kids. And the first one that I want to remind you is to ask for extra services. It never hurts to ask, especially when there's really challenging behaviors. You can always ask for the child's CAN score to be reevaluated. I don't know if every state uses that acronym. Does that sound? Yeah, the child, adolescence, needs and strengths. Yeah, so we found, like, we would have kids who were like, there is no way they're a CANS 1. There's no way. So, but they're not, the caseworker isn't going to do all that work to update it often without us asking. So if we can get that score more appropriate, then they qualify for more services. And then we just have always asked, like, we've gotten, obviously therapy, but like we had a behavior specialist for one of our kids that like came to our house and like would watch me get the kids ready in the morning. It was so helpful. We got therapeutic horseback riding for one of our kids. I don't even think she liked horses that much, but so just really just ask and advocate for yourself, and especially if you have kids that are physically aggressive, definitely insist that you have to be trained to how to deal with that. You should not feel like you should inherently know how to deal with that. They need to train you on how to keep everybody safe. And then another thing that's always helps me is to remember that there's always a purpose for the behavior. Kids don't engage in behaviors for no reason. There's always a reason, because a lot of these behaviors, you think about throwing a tantrum, that requires a lot of energy, and they're not going to spend all that energy for no reason. There's always a reason, but we can't talk to them, the little ones, and even the big ones when their brain is on fire. We can't necessarily talk to them, so we have to play detective a little bit. The typical reasons for behavior are so either to get access to something, to escape something unpleasant that they don't want to do. Sometimes there are more automatic behaviors like sensory stimulation, like rocking or thumb sucking to self-soothe, and then to get attention is another big one. I have at times kept a behavior diary, either like actual journal or just on my phone, so that you can start to notice patterns. So especially keeping track of what was happening right before the behavior, like what led up to that. And then just looking for patterns. We had one of our kids who would have a meltdown before breakfast every single day. We're like, what is it? And then we remembered she had a lot of food scarcity in her background, so there was not always food available. And so we started letting her keep like granola bars, and we're like, spoil your dinner, it doesn't matter. So once she realized I can have food whenever I want, the behaviors really diminished. Now, obviously there have been behaviors that we like never figured out or much harder to figure out, but I do think it's helpful to look for those patterns. Another thing that's helpful is for attention-seeking behaviors, to try to break the cycle of attention for misbehavior. This is another one that's so hard. And this is something we are constantly dealing with. And as Chris mentioned, neglect, I mean, there's all kinds of studies on this, but neglect is really the worst, if you can think of worse abuse. It's worse than being abused, because at least if you're being abused, somebody's paying attention to you. I mean, that sounds horrible, but it's true. Being neglected is the worst thing. And a lot of these kids have been just treated like they're just completely ignored. So they learn very quickly from a very young age that the best way that I'm going to get attention is to misbehave. I'm going to knock the computer off the desk. I'm going to, throw my food. I'm going to, anything to get quick attention. We had a little guy who was a biter.
Yeah, this is funny.
And we joke,
A really good biter.
I think I still have PTSD from him. So, yeah, I would just be making dinner, and I would start to feel his hot, little breath on the back of my leg, and he'd always get me right on the meaty part of my leg. My gosh. So
Hundreds of times. Yes.
So that got my attention, right? I mean, I would have a big response to that. So, especially for behaviors that feel like this demands a response from me, it's hard to break that cycle, but it's possible. Sometimes we can just minimize our response, because what feeds it is the really huge emotional responses that really feeds the behavior. But if we can just lower our response or ignore it where possible, that can help. And then, of course, lavishing them with attention for positive behavior, works from the other direction. I think we have another Kiana video. Let's see. Yes.
Behavior supports for younger children is really interesting. It's interesting for me because although I am supposedly an expert in adolescent health and development, specifically healthy youth development, this is my favorite age group, maybe 0 to 6. But in general, we're still looking at what needs they're trying to fulfill. And in most cases, it's safety, connection, and problem solving. And this is no different for children in foster care. When a child's behavior is erratic, chaotic, loud, demanding and aggressive, and maybe even just extremely noisy, they might be feeling insecure, anxious, overwhelmed, confused, disoriented, lonely, or even misunderstood. And what they most likely need is for the parent to stop and to help them feel safe and secure. As parents, we need to help children move from a state of distress and high alert to a calmer state with lots of reassurance of a loving connection. What they need is empathy. And the best example I have is probably when my daughter was 5. She was starting kindergarten at a new school, and she didn't know anyone at the school, but then also she just moved into my home at about maybe 6 months prior to starting kindergarten. And we're in the bathroom getting her hair done, and I give her this barrette, which I thought it was a cute barrette, but it was a mistake. So the barrette her hair is really thin, and so the barrette did not fit in her hair. And every time she tried, she would get more and more upset. And at some point, I'm like, it's okay, we don't need the barrette. And she's like, no! And she's just trying to and she starts screaming, and she's pulling at her hair and brushing the hair really hard. I didn't know what to do. My PhD in child development and psychology did not prepare me for this. I'm just, trying to, I'm like, okay, well, let's do this, and just offering these different things, but that's not what she needed. At some point, she's just kind of screaming about the brush and her hair and the barrette. I'm like, I don't know, I can't do this. So I walk out, and I'm like, okay. So I just came in, I got down to her level, I got on one knee, and I said, look, I don't know what to do. You're beautiful, your hair looks fine, but we got to go. And I gave her a hug, and she just kind of embraced me and just started bawling. We were late to school. But that's what she needed. She needed empathy. She needed to feel safe and secure. Maybe starting kindergarten for her at this new school was overwhelming for a lot of different reasons. But at that moment, that's what she needed. And nothing could have prepared me for that. No books, I don't. But But there are many, even, she's been adopted for 7 years now. Even in thinking about trying to resolve these issues, these are things that keep creeping up, and then we have to constantly reassure her that she is loved, that this is her safety. And this is it's probably going to be like this for a while. But these are things that I just did not know and wasn't able to prepare for.
So yeah, Kiana's great. So I want to talk a little bit about the teenagers, and I want to stop a little bit and give you a little bit of hope, right? So you've heard a lot of biting, you've heard a lot of negative behaviors, right? So we adopted 2 children from China at age 17 months, right? So we've had one of them 16 right now, and the coolest thing is to see your kids blossom, right? And so what I want to say is, it is possible, right, to go from like I talked about Destiny, becoming an AB student from a DNF student. I want to give you hope that this is not all discouragement. No, you're really going into places that have a lot of trauma and darkness, and you're trying to bring light to the situation. Our 16-year-old, if you met her today, you'd be like, she's more responsible than me. So she's an A student. My son's amazing, the 13-year-old. I mean, I just want to paint a picture that it's not all doom and gloom, right? And whenever I go to classes and it's too negative, I'm like, man, that wasn't completely my experience. So, but as we work with teenagers can be a really fun, but also challenging time, right? I mean, their rebellion starts to kick up, even for biological. Take the foster care out of it. You have the biological. You have rebellious years. And then you don't have all the tools, right? There's only certain things you can do. I think relationship, one of the things that's going to sound corny is a non-confrontational approach based on relationship, in my experience, is the best method of guiding a person's heart in the teenage years. Having a relationship where there's trust built. If you don't have a good relationship, I know sometimes as parents, at least maybe I'm the only one that's ever done this, is I think I'm going to clamp down. I'm going to break the child's disobedience. First of all, that's very hard in the teenage years. Second of all, you have a foster child with trauma and neglect. Sometimes that becomes even harder, right? The whole breaking concept, sometimes I feel like I've been broken more, So relational things. One of the things I'd say, and I said this on the date side, you don't want 100% of your relationship with behavioral issues with a foster teenager. You don't want it to be 100% about the behavior, right? It's got to be well balanced. And so one of the things I always like to think is, and I tell my wife this because it's easy for me as a teenager to see the sinful nature come alive. What I always try to do is to think about assuming positive intent in the core, right? They have a huge sinful nature, but if you go through the veneer, just like God himself would look at us and go, man, that person's pretty awesome. Down deep, they kind of rough around the edges. That's how I feel about the kids, right? You've got to be able to assume positive intent while realizing the sinful nature is in full bloom at that age, oftentimes at that age. The other thing I do is I find that, I have to work on my brain. Maybe you're the only person, but I'm going to share a weakness of mine is that I am easily triggered. I can get kind of grumpy. So I know that there's some people that have a lot of peace and have that Holy Spirit fruit. I tend to be one that can get triggered, and I'm always trying to think emotional intelligence. Am I using my frontal cortex or am I using my reptilian brain as I'm trying to handle that situation? And for me, I have to get balanced with my child so I can be what I need to be for them. And for me, one of the things that's been really helpful, and this is going to sound incredibly corny, but is an appreciation list. Whenever I'm triggered with somebody, I try to write a list of everything I like and appreciate and value and find gifts in that person, and then I try to pray through it so I can use my frontal cortex to actually get and be able to help that child in a more balanced approach where I'm not using my reptilian brain. For me, emotionally, it really works. There's a book by a Christian psychologist from Harvard. It's called The Happiness Advantage. It talks about that very principle about focusing on, he says the most unhappy people, they've done studies, the most unhappy people in the world are auditors and legal people, because they're paid to find the flaws in everything. They're paid they only find the flaws, and they get so ingrained it becomes a Tetris effect where they actually can only find the flaws and they struggle to be appreciative. We got to be careful as parents that we don't develop that as well. So what are your personal triggers? I can tell you mine. I told you I wasn't as good in the younger age group. My trigger was when Noah or one of the kids would bite me, I would be triggered. Or if there was a meltdown with a younger child and I couldn't console it. I like to talk things out. We'll figure out what's your problem. We'll try to, and when they're having a meltdown, I would struggle to keep it together, right? That was my trigger. Jen would be like a champ. She's amazing with that age group. I mean, Noah would bite her, and she'd be, for the most part, pretty good. But we had about 10 kids. A couple of them stayed longer than others. But for her, it was teenagers and lying. That is my wife's number one,
Yes,
two,
dislike.
three trigger. Lying. And it would just do something. And we had a foster child that was great at that gift. And so that causes, and me, it's so funny how one triggers one and not the other. For me, I just expected a teenager to lie to me. So my base case scenario was, this is going to happen because their sinful nature is in full bloom and they're not a disciple. But I could intellectually get my frontal cortex to work, so how are you going to deal with your triggers? You have to understand your triggers are yours, right? You've got to deal with your own triggers in your own heart, because you've got to be able to parent from the Holy Spirit, not a reactionary, sinful flesh result. And so one of the things we had to work on is, no, that's my problem. I got to own my side of the fence. Yes, that line's wrong. I got to deal with that. But I also got to make sure that I'm using that emotional intelligence that I'm supposed to have.
I think you got one more.
Oh, chapters and seasons. So the other thing I would work, these children oftentimes think I'm bad. You know, I'm unworthy. Just the shame of being neglected, the shame of abuse, the shame of, and then it would become a self-perpetuating, I get D's and F, therefore I'm a terrible student. Or I would, and it would become a defining statement. And then there would be behavioral issues that would pop up invariably, right? The terrible things, and it would reinforce that. And so what I would always try to do, and I love this, I don't know where I learned it, but is talk about things as chapters in a book. Look, you're in a really bad chapter right now. This chapter sucks. And to be honest with you, I would sometimes, for my older teenage girl that is 19 now, I say, look, you've had a lot of bad chapters, but this book is going to be awesome. This book is going to be great. This chapter of your life does not define you. We've got to get past this to the next part. And so using that kind of, but we as parents have to think of that as well, right? This is not, do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, right? Do you believe, as Christians, we believe, and God believes that we can change, we can be transformed into the image of Christ. That is how God believes in us. And we got to make sure that we don't have a fixed mindset with our children, that they kind of are who they are, right? And they're incapable of change.
Yeah. Okay, another thing that's helpful to remember is the emotional age versus chronological age. So most of the time there's going to be a huge mismatch. So you might have a big, stinky teenager with 5 o'clock shadow, but likely their emotional age is not what you see. Their emotional age might be a 9 or a 10-year-old or even younger. So, this is really, in our parenting in general, it's really hard to remember. I feel like even this week having my kids at the conference, I'm like, I gotta remember emotional age. So do not get your 18-year-old foster child a puppy like I did. It did not go well. He told me not to do it. I was like, the puppy's going to be her therapy dog, and she's always wanted a puppy. No, it was bad. So that is a perfect example of, forgetting that she was not really 18. She's more like can. So a lot of negative behavior happens sometimes when we just put the child in a situation where they're not emotionally mature enough to handle. So, we would give our kids lots of options of, if they didn't feel like they could engage in the activity that the family was doing, that they had other options, other choice. We're going bowling, you can bowl, you can sit at the snack bar, you can listen to music, if they felt like they couldn't engage or weren't mature enough. Predictable routines, we've been talking about this. This is helpful for all ages of kids in foster care, not just the little kids. I can't stress this enough. Knowing what is coming next is extremely important for all these kids, because all the time, their whole lives, the rug gets pulled out from under them with a minute's notice. They have no idea what's coming. So we would use these predictable routines all the time. With older kids, sometimes getting them to do chores or hygiene tasks, it's gotta make it a routine. We've had teens who were not used to brushing their teeth, like even weekly, let alone daily, forget multiple times a day. So, I don't want to be like every day telling them to brush their teeth. And then we're having a confrontation all the time, because I'm always giving them, a new instruction or something. So, but if we just make it, nope, this is the time, everybody brushes their teeth at this time, they know what to expect. They still will probably hate it, but at least they know what's coming, they know when it's going to be over, and I think that helps take the pressure off the relationship. With a lot of these things, that's what we're focusing on, is how do we take the pressure off the relationship, because the relationship is gold. That is our gold with these kids, and we want to do things that are not going to strain it. Natural consequences. So I'm sure all of us know what this is. Maybe we don't call it this, but if you grew up in the 70s and 80s like I did, some of our parents were master. So my sister's in the audience. Our mom was a genius. She was a genius at this. So she could have written a parenting book, honestly. So natural consequences is just what would happen in the real world if I don't step in, if I don't intervene in this situation. What would happen in the real world? So, for example, you miss the bus, you walk to school, or you take an Uber, you don't like what's for dinner, you go to bed kind of hungry. Often the natural consequence of a behavior is punishment enough, and we don't actually have to be the bad guy in the scenario. And obviously we're dealing with kids with a trauma background, so we have to proceed somewhat cautiously, with, allowing them to be hungry, things like that. But in general, if we can just step back and let the world be the hard, unforgiving place that it is, then we get to come in and we're the heroes. We get to come in and offer comfort. I'm so sorry that this is happening, and offer genuine compassion, because we're not all triggered having to confront the child. We're not emotionally triggered. We get to be the hero and offer perspective. They probably are still not going to like us. For sure, they're not going to like us all the time. But if we're doling out a lot of just arbitrary punishments, like you did that, so I'm going to put this punishment on you. If we're doing that a lot, that's definitely going to strain the relationship. So again, any opportunity where they're not identifying us as the source of their pain is a really good thing.
All right, so we're on the very last point.
Yeah, like 5 or 10 minutes if we do questions.
Yep. So the very last point, so the first one was, we want to deal with behaviors. Our first point was building connections. The last one is boundaries. How many of us, has anybody ever read the Townsend and Cloud books on, or heard of them? I mean, they're pretty popular. Yeah, a lot of people have, right? It's a great intellectual exercise, very hard to implement sometimes, right? To have those boundaries. But I think it's critically important, especially when you're extending yourself and you're doing things that are outside your comfort zone, right? God has created each of us with limits. And if we go past those limits, bad things can happen, right? If you You put your child past a limit or you're past a limit, those things can be very, very challenging. It is possible to serve vulnerable children with healthy boundaries. It's probably an important thing to say. But how do we do that? We're going to talk a little bit about like practicals that we did in our home to make sure that the boundaries was not just an intellectual exercise, but was actually something that we were implementing on a day-to-day basis. So for us, one of the things we had to do is consider all the kids, right? So we have a family of 6. We had 6 kids. We never took in more than 1 foster kid at a time. We probably had about 10 in, and then we had our 2 adopted. And one of the things that was really interesting, it's common that one of the kids will take more time and energy at any given point. Their seasons will go up and down. It is unhealthy if you have one kid that's a black hole and sucks all the negative energy from that home, and you have nothing to give the other kids. That's not good, and it can happen. It had happened in our home a couple of times. And so one of the things we had to look at was, well, how are we going to protect our time with our other kids? And so I just share that, do you have boundaries where you're making sure that the kids on its entirety are being met? So.
And also we definitely want to consider, if you're married, consider your spouse's needs and desires in this area. So for me, before we got married, I was, I always dreamed about sitting around the dinner table with a bunch of kids that didn't look like me. Like, that was my vision for my life. And thankfully, God gave me a spouse who also had a passion and a heart for fostering and adoption. But over the years, I've generally been more of the gas, and he's been the brakes in this area, and that's created some tension. And also, on a serious note, talking about boundaries, I struggle. I have, can have like a savior complex. I want to save the situation. I can take that sibling group. Yeah, we can do this. Just forgetting that I'm just a little piece of the puzzle in these kids' lives. God doesn't actually need me to fix anything. So I think, over the years, so Chris would be put on the brakes. No, I don't think that's a good, that's not a good one for us, or that's not going to work. And over the years, I got resentful, so we had to deal with that a lot in our marriage. But, recently, God is teaching me that God put Chris in my life as a safeguard to really protect me and to protect the rest of our family, so that I'm not dragging, the whole family into these boundaryless situations. So I just think it's really important that that both spouses are 100% on board. We've had people ask, so I want to foster, but my spouse doesn't. Like, do you think that'll work? I'm like, no, it will not work. It will definitely. I shouldn't say.
If you want a bitter spouse, it'll work.
I shouldn't say it won't work. That's probably bad. In our experience, it would not work. I think that it's important for both spouses to be 100%, and also that we're not pushing our spouse beyond their level of faith. The Bible talks about do everything according to your faith. It's really important that we respect those differences. And after 5 years, I gotta check on time here. After 5 years, Chris was done taking new placements. Our situation now, we're ongoing parenting, our child that's aged out, but we stopped taking new placements, and I was kind of less done, but he was done, and God has opened up lots of other ways for us to serve that we're both passionate about, and God works it out, but we don't want to push our spouse beyond their faith. Let's do another last quick video here.
I can't stress enough how important it is to have a solid support system. Fostering is difficult. It has its rewards, but it's definitely a challenge. And oftentimes I've been, find myself thinking, oh my goodness, am I being blessed or am I being cursed? And, you have these really tough or these bad experiences sometimes, and then you think, oh, it can't get any worse than this. And lo and behold, something else happens that tops that experience. And so I'm not trying to be discouraging, but sometimes this is the reality. And for my household, that solid support system has helped us to be able to continue fostering and to foster the 8 years that we've been able to foster. And for me as a single person, I don't think I would have been able to continue and proceed with the adoption without the help of my support system. When I was single, I relied heavily on my family who lives in Indianapolis, but then I was also able to have some families in the actual church who were willing to complete the paperwork that DCS requires regarding like your health, mental health status, and things of that nature, which is quite intrusive, so that my child could spend time there without me being present. And this was very helpful because sometimes I needed a break. And so after church, when the singles would go do something, it would be nice that she could hang out with one of these families and play with their kids, and I wouldn't have to be there with them. Now, the other thing where the support system comes in handy and where I think it's really important is with whatever fellowship you may belong to, but then also thinking about location and travel. So prior to the pandemic, and even when I was single, so we couldn't attend worship services without the approval of the Department of Child Services because we would need to cross state lines. We live in Tennessee and we attend fellowship in Asheville, North Carolina. And if this approval was delayed, denied, or whatever, we could not attend. I couldn't leave the state of Tennessee with my child without the state's permission. And it became a little bit easier after I got married because as we had different children that were in foster care in our household, we were able to rotate who would go down and who could stay back. And so at some point, my husband would go down and then I would stay back and then he would stay back and then I would attend until, we would receive the appropriate approvals that the state requires. But I do know that throughout this entire process, this support system, so I had 2 particular families that would call and check in, and we would pray over the phone and different things like that just would make sure that we were good. And I really appreciate that because parenting is hard in general. Parenting children who are oftentimes pushing you away is really difficult. And sometimes it can be a bit discouraging. And so having someone that it tries to encourage you in that capacity and is really trying to support your efforts in those different ways is pivotal to not only your success as a parent, but then also just helping your family just to be well. And so, as I said before, I can't stress enough how important a solid support system is as you're fostering youth.
So as we wrap up here, so yes, get your support system. You will need a small army to help you if you're going to do this or you are doing this. So definitely advocate for getting help. So I want to share, as we talk about boundaries, just definitely having a heart of surrender is part of this whole process. And I don't want to minimize people's grief and pain in this area because, we've been talking about relationship, but then what happens when we have to sever the relationship in a really painful way? So there's no pat answer, just be surrendered, just trust God, but it's very painful. But I do want to share this story because I think it's really powerful. So we started fostering this little boy.
He's one of our 10.
In 2016. We fostered him for a year, lots of trauma, lots of behavior issues, mom and dad not in the picture, and they were looking for a adoptive home for him. We knew that we were not the right match for him, but then another couple, this is Eric and Crystal and Noah, they just expressed a desire to adopt him, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we prayed for. He's going to grow up in the church and disciple family. We'll get to see him all the time. They're in our congregation. So I'm going to share. I want to read. This is just like 2 minutes. It'll take 2 minutes to read, but I want to read the rest of the story in their words. So they wrote a little snippet here. When we first met Noah, he was 3. We were excited and scared to finally jump into parenthood. Most people get to start when their child is born. Noah was already walking and talking and getting into everything. It felt surreal to say to people, this is my son, but it didn't take long for him to call us mommy and daddy. About 90 days into his placement, Noah's caseworker picked him up for a visit and informed us that they were going to change his plan from pre-adoptive to reunification. If anybody is fostering, you know that things like this happen. I prayed for God to intervene and make it possible for us to adopt him, whether that meant Noah's dad making mistakes or someone realizing that our environment was just better for him. However, as the months went by, none of these things happened. This process took over 6 months, growing closer to Noah while knowing that he would be leaving us. When the day came for him to move back to his father's house, I was devastated. To make matters worse, we weren't allowed to have any contact with him. We slipped into a depression that kept us from even discussing fostering again. It was just too painful. For 10 months, we heard nothing. Then, just as we were about to leave for a vacation, we were notified that Noah had been placed back into foster care, and we were asked to foster him again. The plan was still to reunify him with his father, but all I knew was that having him back was like receiving my son back from the dead. We grew even closer, and I thanked God every day for the time that we had, no matter how long or short. Noah was eventually reunified with his family for the second time, and I think now it's going on third and fourth times, but with one big difference. His mother now wanted us to be part of his life. Every few months, he would visit us for a weekend, or we would go to see him. Noah is now 8 years old. We still see him every other weekend, try to see him every other weekend, and he still calls us mom and dad, along with his bio mom and dad. We've been able to build a rapport with his parents. His father, once combative about us seeing Noah, now actually thanks us for coming. This is huge. We know the dad. It's huge. His mother calls us when she's having a hard day with Noah, and we talk her through the rough days. They allow us to help plan birthday parties. Noah has a very hard road ahead of him, but we will be there to help him see the love of God and show him what God has done in his life. We'll never know what the future holds, but we're always thankful for the time that we have. So the thing that inspires me about their story is that they could have just let the pain and the disappointment and the heartbreak we're done, or just end the relationship. But instead, they gave up their agenda. They had in their minds what they wanted, and they gave it up. They surrendered to God's plan and God's timing, and now they're still getting to impact Noah, and they're now impacting Noah's whole family.
Yeah. So we're in closing. Yeah, no, that's an incredible story. It's funny, Noah comes when they visit Eric and Crystal. He comes with us and calls us mommy and daddy. He's got a lot of
many
moms,
mommies and daddies.
A lot of moms and dads. So I want to close. Hopefully, again, my goal was just with the Holy Spirit, hopefully we could encourage you today in one small nugget, right? I don't know, we talked about building connections, behavioral support, boundaries, Kiana stories, Eric and Crystal. I want you to know that, when it says, let us not give up weary in doing good, for a proper time we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. What we're doing really matters. If you're thinking about foster care, I want you to know it really matters. It's a light in a dark place, right? If you're doing it and you're in the thick, and sometimes you feel like you're in the front line of a battle, you're doing God's work, right? It's gonna do things. And well, in closing, I want to share a prayer that I pray. I actually have it on my phone, or have had it on my phone. I just switched phones, but it was my homepage, and this prayer has really impacted me, especially in the context of adoption and foster care, where it talks about, Lord, make me an instrument of peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. And where there's sadness, joy. I won't go through the rest, but I would pray this. Use me as an instrument, because I can be an instrument of harm or an instrument of good, right? I have the capability of being, I'll just be honest, in my sinful nature, I can do either. And I'm praying, the foster care system desperately needs Christians to be instruments of peace. And I pray that you can be part of that plan. So thank you for your time today. We're going to stick around if you have questions. It's right at noon. It's lunchtime, but we will stay as long as you want to stay if you want to come up here and talk to us and ask any questions. So thank you for your time.